Friends and dear viewer, The Woman in Black by Susan Hill, this fictional novel published in 1983. So this Woman in Black by Susan Hill follows the Gothic literary tradition. Hill explores traditional horror tropes such as abandoned estates and ghost haunting set in an unspecified time in England's countryside. The horror novella focused on the first person point of view by Arthur Kipps as he reflects on a ghost haunting experience. As a young man, Hill explores themes of loss and mourning, the impact of holding on to the past, and the clash between rationality and superstitious belief. The Woman in Black peers into the life of not only Kipps but also the community in a small countryside town. So this novel is adapted into the television stage film production. The novels contains themes of child loss. Let us see what we have in this novel. While enjoying Christmas Eve with his family, Arthur Kipps' stepchildren remind him of his past as they take turns telling ghost stories. Haunted by a memory, Kipps decided to write about his experience in a small town in the English countryside. However, he wishes for no one to read his story until after his death. In his early 20s, Kipps works as a solicitor under his employer, Mr. Bentley. He is engaged to a woman named Stella and has plans to take on more responsibilities in his career. Being tested to attend a funeral for one of their clients, Kipps leaves London to settle the estates of Mrs. Alice Drablu, hoping to prove he can take on more work for Mr. Bentley in his old age. Kipps heads to Crichton Griffith, where he will go to Mrs. Drablu's estate, Marsh House, to sort her personal and legal documents before the property is sold. Kipps, who holds a strong distaste for the fog in London, is excited to head to the countryside. On the train ride, he meets Mr. Daly, a local from Crichton Gifford. Kipps learns the town is surrounded by its own fog that appears suddenly. As Kipps and Mr. Daly continue to talk, Mr. Daly does not reveal a lot of information about Mrs. Drablow and hardly comments on Kipps' business in town. Upon arrival at the inn, Kipps learns the entire town tends to avoid the conversation about Earl Marsh House and Mrs. Drablu. The funeral is not expected to have many attendees, and Kipps discovers a mystery around the estate and its owner. Kipps meets with local solicitor Mr. Jerome, who accompanies him to the funeral. The next day, Mr. Jerome reveals that he will not be going to Earl Marsh House with Kipps, but he has arranged for Mr. Kickwick, a local man, to take Kipps to the estate. During the funeral, Kipps sees a woman dressed in a black with a veil covering her face. Kipps recognizes her beauty, but also thinks that the woman must have a disease due to her sickly appearance. When Kipps asks Mr. Jerome about this woman, Mr. Jerome panics and refuses to talk about it. On the way to Elmarsh House, Mr. Kickwick tells Kipps that he will be stuck at the estate until the tide goes back out an island. At the house, Kip spent some time exploring the property and discover an old family cemetery. He also sees the woman in black again, which causes him to panic and run into the house. Later on, he hears the sounds of a horse and cart falling into the marsh and the screams of a young child. However, the fog is too thick to see anything outside. Kipps hides away in the house until Mr. Kickwick picks him up later that night. Back at the inn, Kipps sees the woman in black in his nightmares and feels a sense of dread over returning to the estate. He talks to Mr. Daly about how to proceed with his job because he does not want to disappoint Mr. Bentley for his fiancée, Stella. Due to the large amount of documents Mrs. Drablow acquired, Kipps plans to stay the night at Ilmarsh House, so Mr. Daly loans him Spider, his dog, for the company and protection. Over the next several days, Kipps discovers letters between Mrs. Drablow and Janet Humphrey, her sister, over a young boy named Nathaniel. During the days, the estate stays quiet, but at night, Kipps wakes up frequently and is overwhelmed with fear. Kipps is awoken by Spider growling at a locked door, and Kipps hears again a child screaming. He also hears a rocking chair moving in the hidden room. The door spikes interest in Kipps, and he decides to go into the room, which ends up being a nursery. One early morning, Spider and Kipps are outside when a whistle causes Spider to run out into the marsh. Spider starts to drown, and Kip runs after him, pulling him out of the marsh just before they both become trapped. Kipps looks up at the house and sees the woman in black staring at him from the nursery. Kipps passes out for a few hours and wakes to find Mr. Daly already at the estate. Mr. Daly already suggests that Kipps leave. They pack up his belongings and the documents he already sorted for Mrs. Drablow, and he finishes reading the letters between Mrs. Drablow and Janet Humphrey. Mrs. Drablow adopted Janet's sons, Nathaniel, despite Janet's unwillingness to give her son away. Janet was overcome with grief and sadness, which worsened when Nathaniel died from drowning in the marsh due to an accident with a horse-drawn cart. Mr. Daly also reveals that the sighting of the woman in black, who is not known to be Janet Humphrey, is followed by the death of one of the local children. Kipps worries if his experience with the woman has caused the death of another child. However, Mr. Daly tells him this has not happened. After recovering for almost drowning in the marsh, Kipps goes back to the London and marries Stella. They have a son, Joseph. One day the family spends time outside and Stella and Joseph ride around in the horse-drawn cart. Kipps notices the woman in black standing near his family, and before he can get to them, his wife and son have a fatal crash. So this is the story of The Woman in Black by Susan Hill, a novel published in 1983, and we find in this novel the themes, the consequences of holding on to pain and the past. The past plays a pivotal role for all the characters in the novel, and most of their past tend to come with painful memories. Notably, Kipps and Janet Humphrey's past caused them to hold on to their pain in their present state. The novel suggests that becoming trapped by the past can prolong pain, whereas learning how to acknowledge and integrate painful memories in the healthier way enables meaningful healing. Janet's character specifically exists with so much pain that she continues to grieve even in afterlife. turning her into a malevolent spirit seeking vengeance for the loss of her child. In her letters, Janet writes, "What else can I do? I'm quite helpless." Regarding Mrs. Dreblow's adoption of Nathaniel, Janet's tone implies a deep, embedded loss that causes her significant grief, which keeps defined as a quiet, resigned bitterness. Her helplessness perpetuates a need to take control of the situation. However, the loss of her son forces Janet to endure even more pain that appears to be inescapable even in the death. Janet's inability to escape her pain forces her to exist only in the past, creating a cycle of turmoil for not only herself but also those that encounter her. So, this is the story of The Woman in Black by Susan Hill. I hope you will enjoy it. Thank you very much.